Well, you are the luckiest people at Linux Foundation Open Source Summit Europe today, because you're going to get to see this talk, right, which has a lot of amazing imagery in it from probably a show. This is a talk about engaging more young people, more people, early career people into standards work and trying to keep the work of standards more sustainable. And ironically, I'm using imagery from probably a show that most young people have never watched, right? But anyway, we're gonna run with it. Okay. So this is a very long-winded talk title. Originally, the title was going to be called Keeping Standards Sustainable, but then Jory sent me an idea for changing the name of the talk title to Engaging the Next Generation of Standards Leaders. And I thought, Jory, you don't know what you've done. You really do not know what you've done with that. So anyway, that is how we ended up here. My name is Dan Appelquist. Just to give a brief intro, blah, blah, blah. I work for Samsung Open Source Group. I'm in the open source team. I do open source and open standards. I used to work for a lot of other companies, UK government, for instance, Vodafone, Telefonica. I was also a former .com CTO. I've been in this industry for a long time. I co-chair, what is going on here? I co-chair the W3C advisory board. I was previously co-chair of the W3C technical architecture group. Anybody here not know what W3C is? World Wide Web Consortium. Sorry, I should have spelled that out. It's one of the standards bodies that we talk about. I co-founded with Jory something called Open Web Docs. I also co-chair in the OpenSSF, the Global Cybersecurity Policy Working Group. That's one thing that I do. And I am a participant in one of the other projects under one of the other standards projects here, which is the C2PA. And also, I'm literally from the 1960s, right? So I'm coming to you from the past. This is insights from the past that and you know, for the future and for your future. What I mean by that is I was born in 1969. So that's what I mean. I literally am from the 1960s. Anyway. Just to start off, let's talk about the greybeard problem in standards, right? The greybeard problem is real. Let's read off some of these wonderful things that people have said, and then or things that I remember people having said while in standards groups. Okay. This is how we've always done it. Why should we do it a different way? This is how we've always done it. Right? Oh, we tried that 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. It didn't work then. Why would it work now? This is out of scope for us. We don't work on that scope. It's out of scope, right? Oh, that's an edge case. That's an edge case. Why would you want to worry about that edge case? That's a complete edge case. Why would I want to talk to that person? They're not senior enough. I've never heard of them. They don't know how to engage here. That person over there doesn't know how to engage here in this forum. The insert other SDO way is better. So if you're in W3C, you might say the IETF way is better. If you're in IETF, you're going to say W3C way is better, right? You know, whatever. The XYZ way is better. By the way, these are all phrases that at one time or another I have heard come out of my mouth. All right, so I am not immune to this. Nobody who works in standards, and this kind of moves into other online communities, but nobody is really immune from this kind of way of thinking, these kinds of anti-patterns, right? And who here hasn't seen this conversation go on? What's an IRC? Well, what's a Discord? Come on, right? Like this is, like, again, different communities have different ways of communicating, have different ways of different tooling that they use, and these tend to get ossified and turned into something that becomes received knowledge that if you don't know, well, then you really can't engage here. You don't know how to engage in this particular group, right? So this is a kind of examples, or these are kinds of examples of gatekeeping. And I think gatekeeping and this false idea of meritocracy, that's why I put it in air quotes or quotes, meritocracy, which is something that I really think gets misapplied quite a lot, they're a recipe for loss of relevance. So why does any of this matter? I guess to start off here, why does this matter to us here? So first of all, we know from science, and you can look this up. There are lots of I didn't want to include all the references here, but there are references here. Age-mixed teams and also diverse teams in general perform better. They produce better results than homogeneous teams, provided that the environment is a supportive one. And that's an important proviso, right? And we're going to talk about that a little bit here. So when we're talking about standards development, we're talking about building things in teams. And it's important that we understand that those teams function in exactly the same way as workplace teams, in any other kind of teams that we might imagine. So this applies to standards just as it applies to any other discipline. And we are building the future here when we are building standards. I like to say that standards, first of all, are rules that tell computers what they can and cannot do, and therefore they can tell people what they can and cannot do. And they are rules that help us build things that people will build other stuff on top of. That is the definition of building the future. We're building the future when we build technical standards. And we have to decide what kind of future we want. Our standards need to make sense for everyone. Everyone in this room, but everyone outside of this room. They need to make sense for all the people, the real people that are going to be engaging with the systems that are built on top of the standards that we're building. They need to be built to accommodate diverse stakeholders. They need to encode our ethics, the way that we think about how we build things, the way, what we want these systems to be able to do. They need to support a future in which we would actually like to live, right? So I think some people who work on standards forget about that for a second, or they build something and then they feel like, that's it, I built it, I put my company's requirements into the standard, so therefore I'm done, right? But you're actually building something that you might have to interact with in the future. And you need to think about yourself, your own family, your future, the people in the future who are going to be interacting with this. How are they going to feel? We need to be able to support marginalized communities, not only the mainstream when we're talking about these technical standards. We have to align also with internationally recognized human rights. And sorry for bringing this topic up, but what do standards have to do with human rights, you might ask? Okay, so again, technical standards are the rules that tell systems what they can and can't do, therefore they can tell people what they can and can't do. We can build standards that accommodate the needs of people outside the mainstream of society, or we can choose to ignore those needs. Another example here, very relevant to communication standards, we can build standards that resist surveillance, right? Just as an example, or actually I could use some water. We can build them to accommodate surveillance, right? So those are some good examples of. Give me 1 second, sorry. Thank you. Okay. So interestingly, and I won't talk too much more about human rights, but I was just on a call about this yesterday, sponsored by the UN Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights, that has a report on human rights and technical standards. And part of why they're doing this is that they see a trend towards more and more standards organizations incorporating human rights into their thinking, human rights due diligence. I've done a whole talk last Open Source Summit in Denver about this topic in more depth. But basically, one of the things that they are saying in their report is they are calling upon standards organizations to put in place adequate human rights due diligence process into their processes themselves, to bake human rights into the standards process or the process by which standards are made, to adopt policy commitments that respect human rights, and to make standard setting processes as transparent, open, and inclusive as possible. And I'm going to double down on that in a second. This is a very interesting document, and they're about to come out with a sequel to this document, which, again, talks about the landscape of human rights and standards. I definitely recommend anybody who's interested in this, anybody who's working in standards at all, should be paying attention to this work. And W3C, IETF, ISO, ETSI, ITU, all these different standards organizations were part of this call yesterday that I was just attending. So it was very, very exciting to see this happening. Anyway, the part of the point here is that diversity and inclusion is actually not optional when it comes to the teams that we're building to build these kinds of standards. Diverse teams produce better results. Standards is no different. If you're excluding voices, you're missing use cases and possibly abuse cases. And by the way, it's not diversity of thought or diversity of company type. I've noticed a disturbing Overton window type trend of overloading the word diversity. Let's be clear, we're talking about people from marginalized communities when we're talking about diversity. We're talking about imbalances of power, not about like, that person is from an IoT company, and so therefore we have diversity now. No, that doesn't count. One specific abuse case that I wanted to highlight, or an example of what I'm talking about, W3C Web of Things. When I was in the technical architecture group, one of the things that we do is we review other people's activities. So the W3C Web of Things was coming out with a bunch of documents, a bunch of standards about how Internet of Things type objects can interoperate with each other using web technologies. And the tag in our review said to them, well, have you considered the abuse cases? Have you, for instance, considered how abusive spouses or controlling partners might use this technology in order to surveil somebody else? Blank stare. Really, they had not thought about these kinds of abuse cases at all, because they'd really just been sitting in kind of a technical silo thinking about how great it was if sensors talk to each other. Okay, fine, but you got to be able to actually pay attention to the abuse cases if you want to really understand how to build something for humans. Well, wait a second. I thought we were talking about the next generation. Why are we suddenly talking about human rights and standards, Dan? This is not fair. This is false advertising. Okay, yeah, but guess what? Like, younger people probably have a generally keener sense of social justice than you do, okay? I'm sorry, but that's true. It's just human nature. And if you want, I guess my point that I'm trying to make here is if you want to attract younger people, if you want to attract early career people, you really do have to think about some of these things. You have to broaden the way that you think about standards and standards making to think about these additional cases, and to think about appealing to a wider market. A wider set of cases, and being inclusive in how you build these environments that the standards are made of. So recruiting diverse participants is not enough. You actually have to keep these diverse participants. Even if you make an awful lot of effort in actually trying to bring new people in who are younger or have different viewpoints or come from marginalized backgrounds, if you don't have an inclusive environment, then they will evaporate. And then you will say, oh, I guess they were never really interested, or I guess they weren't technical enough, or I guess they didn't engage correctly, right? But actually, they might evaporate because they didn't feel comfortable. And I've had personal feedback from people that I brought into technical standards organizations telling me this. And it's important to listen when you get that kind of feedback. Like inclusiveness, inclusive culture is important. Inclusive policies are even more important. And by the way, this means having a strong code of conduct and enforcement procedures. Those are so important. Like we're all about the codes of conduct in open source and open standards generally, but we're not very good about the enforcement procedures. And the enforcement procedures is where the rubber hits the road. If a code of conduct violation report is not acted upon, then you will see that, again, those people will evaporate and they won't be here anymore, and you won't know why they evaporated. They just will go. Geographical considerations is another aspect of diversity, by the way, that we deal with a lot in standards, and I really thought it was important to highlight. So this can manifest in statements like, oh, well, we don't have any Europeans on our community calls, right? But actually the calls are at a very inconvenient time for Europeans, right? Or you have local outreach. That's another way to encourage more participation from other time zones. So a good example of this is W3C with its chapter system and local in-language member meetings. OpenSSF also has local meetings. And as Jory pointed out to me, having a mix of sync and async can also help really bridge this gap in terms of geographical considerations, so that people don't always have to be on the same call at the same time in order to get work done. Cultural considerations, giving space to people who are not as comfortable in English, considering accommodating different communication styles, ensuring that the back of the room has the opportunity to speak, reaching out and having one-to-ones with people, and considering disabilities when choosing tooling, right? This is something that came up a lot when we were talking about what kinds of video call systems to use. Well, I like WebRTC calls, but actually, the people who we were working with who might have a visual disability or a visual impairment were telling me, well, Zoom is actually the best. Okay, well, it's not my favorite tool, but I'm happy to use Zoom if it makes it more inclusive. And that's really important to listen to those kinds of conversations. Case study here, W3C Code of Conduct. I just wanted to highlight it because I happen to think it's a very good one. It's very clear. What's clear about it? It calls out specific wanted and unwanted behaviors. People have said, oh, it's quite long. Well, that's the point. It is very specific in what it says is good, what it says is bad. Respect, empathy, accommodation of differences, unwanted, calling out, microaggressions, deliberate misgendering, sea lioning, things like that, specific behaviors, and defining them and saying, and giving people a leg to stand on if they then want to issue, it gives people a leg to stand on if they want to issue a violation report, but it also provides some important deterrence for people from actually having these behaviors. Anyway, that is also something that I put time into, and I've encouraged, or I've given time of my staff, of people that are working for me, in order to put time and energy into development of codes of conduct. I think that's an important aspect of this. We need to know that that's a kind of additional labor that we need to do in order to make these systems work. Case study, another case study is C2PA has a special threats and harms task force, which is established at the beginning of the effort. It's explicitly there to make discussion for abuse cases. And it's the recognition that this tech, and C2PA in particular, is a tech that embeds secure metadata about images, about the authenticity of images and media. So it's very much aimed at human rights. For instance, photojournalists who work in conflict zones might want to use C2PA metadata to show that a photo was taken at a specific location. However, that can also have privacy implications. How am I doing? Okay, all right. And this is led by a representative from Witness, which is a human rights nonprofit, which is really all of these things are so important. Giving space to civil society groups within our open standards is another element that the UN report called out as being important for enabling human rights in standards. Attracting talent and retaining them. This is something that is a kind of key aspect. Bonus points for anybody who knows where this screen still came from. Come on. All right, you guys got to bone up on your Star Trek. This is it, right? All right. Come to me later, and I'll tell you. I'm not going to embarrass myself on stage. All right, so in one particular aspect, again, I wanted to highlight some of the work that we did in the W3C technical architecture group, because I think it can be instrumental or instructive here. So W3C has 3 elected governance bodies, the others being the advisory board and the board of directors. But the technical architecture group has, as one of these elected bodies, it has a limited number of people. Many standards organizations and other types of open source organizations have the same kinds of mechanisms, right? So how do you create an environment where that becomes inclusive, where you can encourage people to join or to put themselves forward for that kind of group, for that kind of leadership group? There's a real problem that we had trying to convince people to put themselves forward for this. So some of the things that we did in order to make that environment more friendly is using agile-inspired processes, such as retrospectives, rotating the leadership, having regular elections so that we don't have the same chair for 10 years, which we did, who was me. Focusing on DEI and having a respective culture, so making sure that we quote and take seriously our code of conduct. Having a transparent decision-making, that's a key item. Signposting things with things like the ethical web principles. When we developed the ethical web principles, it helped other people to understand, hey, this is a group that really takes some of this stuff seriously. I'm interested in having those kinds of conversations. I got told by an oncoming tag member after we developed the ethical web principles, you reminded me of why this work is important, right? And that really touched me. That really made me feel like we had done something right. Making a point of reaching out to diverse candidates is another aspect that, again, chairs need to worry about this, but really any working group member, it's their responsibility to reach out to find more diverse candidates. Also, we developed something called the Tag Associates because we wanted to expand the efficacy of this group, but the group was limited by process to having a certain number of members. So let's say, okay, we'll create a kind of auxiliary group that is people that we choose that will help us with the work, and we can be training our replacements that way. It's an on-ramp so that we can actually have people that are familiar with the work and familiar with how we do this work. And we've already had one person who's transitioned from becoming a tag associate to being a full tag member. I want to talk about the W3C Inclusion Fund briefly. I won't go through all this stuff, but this is basically another example of some kind of mechanism that standards organizations can have to promote better inclusion. Like face-to-face meetings are such an important aspect to any kind of online community. And they're often the thing that is the most difficult for new members or people that don't have a big company behind them to help to attend. So we put in place something called the Inclusion Fund, that has now for a number of years been subsidizing people's travel in order to come to these kinds of face-to-face events. Again, that can be so important for encouraging new members. And I know people who have come up to me who again, have given such good feedback on how this has helped them engage with this new community. So it really has helped us bring in new members. And how did this start? Someone put their hand up and said, I will commit to help sponsoring an inclusion-funded TPAC. I don't want to toot my own horn too much, but that was me. I did that. And when I did that, and I only had a certain amount of money because I didn't have access to a big budget. I just said, I can commit XYZ amount of money. Guess what? Like 3 other companies raised their hand and said, oh yeah, okay, we'll commit some money too, right? And that really taught me it just takes one person, and it doesn't need to be the most important person in the room. I'm never the most important person in the room. I should know. Also, reinvention is sometimes a feature, not a bug. Every org needs structured reinvention cycles, like, for instance, using agile tools, having regular community health checks, being willing to embrace change, even disruptive change. This is something that we all need to pay attention to. We shouldn't get too ossified in our ways. Again, coming back to the whole thing about we've always done it that way. Be willing to embrace change in how you work. Received wisdom can be an anti-pattern. I'm really going to skip past this because I've kind of talked about it already to death. All right, so yes, it takes time away from technical work. It's time well spent to do this kind of agile retrospectives, examining how we work. And in recruiting teams, I wanted to talk about this a little bit because many of us not only are working in standards or working in open source, but are also recruiting people into the teams that we either manage or we're helping to recruit new candidates into the teams that we're in. And one of the things that I've really found useful and helpful in trying to ensure that those teams are diverse is to treat diversity and inclusion as a skill set. So this phrase, literally, we put this in our job rec, experience implementing and working with diversity and inclusion policies and codes of conduct in online technical communities. And people who interviewed came to me and they said, I interviewed for this role because I saw that. Because I saw that you're serious about this, that you think about this topic, right? Listen to feedback and act on that feedback. I mentioned people coming up to me after standards weeks and saying, I felt really alone. I felt like I wasn't being listened to. I felt marginalized. Listen to that and be willing to act on that feedback. Otherwise, again, you're going to see people evaporate. And then make standards work count. That's another thing. Like many organizations seem to view standards as like some kind of extra thing that you do in your 20% time. Actually being able to make sure that you count that work towards people's goals, that you measure them within the organizations that they work for, and make it an incentive that it's a reward or that it is seen as rewarding that work or incentivizing it or evaluating people based on it. And using standard experience to recruit engineers, like saying, I'm interested in engineers, even bonus, do you have experience in standards? So, to reference a Geordie meme here, choosing people based on diversity of the candidates, not really, and also illegal. But recruiting for diversity and inclusion as a skill set, that one is definitely the way to go, let me tell you. Okay, so tell people also, engage with early careers people. Go talk to students. I've personally done talks to high school age students, middle school students, university students, and I've talked about the work that we do in standards. It's an eye-opener for them because they don't know that this is a career option for them. They don't understand. A lot of people think, I used to think standards were something that happened to me. That was something that somebody who I hired told me. But definitely the high school and college students that I've talked to, that I've given talks to, have no idea that you can come and do technical standards, that that's anything, that they can be part of that. Demystify, explain, guide, and mentor. And considering diversity when selecting who to put forward for leadership roles, such as organizations that put somebody forward for, say, one of the elected bodies within the organizations that we're talking about here. Representation really matters, especially at the top. If people go into an organization, a technical standards organization, and they see these elected leadership bodies and they're full of white guys, then that says something about the organization. I'm sorry to be so pointed, but I do think it needs to be said. And another thing you can do is report, as organizations, report on your diversity. So W3C issues a lot of graphs like this. And don't shy away if it's bad, by the way, because the diversity in 2025 has not, has gotten not as good as it was. I mean, you can see it's gotten over time. The trend is good, but we got some work to do in 2025 actually in this particular group. Don't shy away from that. All right. Finally, I wanted to make one final plea. Don't actually leave the graybeards behind. Don't make them feel let out, that they don't have a place. First of all, that's called ageism. It's also illegal. All right. And when I'm talking about young people, by the way, you can imagine that I'm talking about early career people too, because there are a lot of people that are, no matter what your age is, it's more about where you are in your career, where you are in your skills, that kind of thing. Become a mentor. Make spaces for mentorship. That's important. Like it's one thing to say, oh, I'm going to mentor people and I'm going to do a lot of mentoring. But if your organization that you work for or the standards organization that we're talking about here doesn't offer spaces for that, then it makes it more difficult. If you can create spaces for mentorship, then it makes it easier, and it makes that transition easier for people who are to move on and find a way to support younger people, earlier stage people in their career. And also providing a space for alumni that provides alumni a way to input. That's something that we did in W3C TAG as well. We have this concept of alumni, which is like a separate GitHub group, and anybody who's in the alumni is always welcome to come in and comment and do anything, but they're not part, but that, so again, it leaves a space. So my challenge to you, if any of this was inspiring, is make it a personal goal to bring someone into technical standards work who was not here before, and be a mentor to them. So don't just bring them in, like actually say, I will have regular one-to-ones with you. I will help you. If you have any problems, I'll come to me. Bonus points if they're from an underrepresented group. I can say that I personally can count 4 people who I have recruited personally into teams that I have managed who are now, who are from underrepresented groups, who are now working in standards still, some of whom have attained leadership roles. And I think that's great. That's a 1-to-4 replacement ratio. Okay, that's a 400% increase as far as I'm concerned of new blood into standards. And I encourage and challenge all of you to do the same. So what are you waiting for? Says Picard. Okay, that's it. That's it. That's it from me. I really appreciate your time listening to my rants. And I appreciate Jory's support in helping to think about this topic and suggesting this topic, actually. So it really is your fault. And also, yeah, so thanks very much. Any questions? Yes. Yeah, it's a fine line, and I don't want to. I mean, I I think you really need to pay attention to both things. Really, you need to make sure, because the communication and the way people talk, the way people communicate, is often age related, and the tools that people are used to working with, like for instance IRC versus Discord. On the other hand, you know, I do know there are plenty of teens who love IRC, right? There's no one size fits all here. It's about listening and paying attention and making sure that you catch, you know, especially if you're a senior member of a community or a chair or in some kind of leadership role. That's really who this is aimed at, is, you know, make sure that you pay attention and that you're not excluding based on any of those factors, I think is the answer. I don't know if that's a good answer or not, but yeah. Any other? Yeah. Like surveillance, for instance. Yeah. Right. Well, I think that's always a really difficult conversation to have. And I think that the best, and sometimes the best we can do as technical standards makers, is to highlight the discrepancies and to make people aware of those issues when we're getting conflicting signals from, say, from different regulators. Like one regulator is saying encryption is super important, and another regulator is saying, oh, actually we need backdoors all the time for so that we can do lawful intercept. Well, you know, those are conflicting requirements, right? So being able to sticking your hand up and saying these are actually conflicting requirements, and by the way, backdoors, as all of the, you know, literature, including many academic papers, have shown doesn't actually work. And, you know, being that person is sometimes annoying and sometimes career limiting, or it might be career limiting initially, but long term, you know, it's gonna not be career limiting. That's my view anyway. I mean, when I was at Telefonica, there were engineers that I was working with who really did not like the move to HTTPS on the web. And this was a time when Snowden had come in and there were all these revelations about us ubiquitous snooping, or the security services of governments hoovering up all kinds of unencrypted HTTP traffic and storing it in huge warehouses. I hosted a workshop in London where we got IETF people and W3C together, and we said, okay, there's a problem here, and this is not just a social problem, it's a technical problem. The web and the internet is not going to be able to function if we cannot rely on encryption. We need to move to more encrypted web. How are we going to fix this problem? What are the blockers? Let's identify the blockers, and let's try and fix it. And I don't pretend that that was the defining moment, but there was clearly a global trend towards moving towards encrypted web, and that was one of the things that moved us along. So, you know, I think sometimes technical standards makers can come together to shift the needle when it comes to policy. Okay, thanks everyone. I appreciate it.